tell the story of how Charlie Sykes shaped Wisconsin politics. And the guests we have on tonight are the perfect people to tell that story. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dan Kaufman, who wrote The Fall of Wisconsin. And Dan is a Wisconsin-born journalist. And he's written for the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Guardian. We'll talk to him a little bit about how much time he spent. I mean, he knew everything. I read the book. Amy, my producer, read the book years ago before this show, but we were like, we got to get this guy if he can be on it. And he agreed to be on the show today. And then we have also Robert Craig, who is joining us from Citizen Action of Wisconsin. He's the executive director of Milwaukee. He has been I wasn't in Wisconsin when Act 10 happened. I was in New York City. Patti Vasquez, who's on the show, is in Chicago, and Ben Cominos is from Pennsylvania, but he lives in Appleton now. So none of us were actually there when all that happened. So we can't tell the story or even talk about the story without having somebody who's been there. So Robert Craig has been there, and then we have Jon Shelton also, who's going to be on the show. He's the president of AFT, the American Federation of Teachers in Wisconsin. He's a professor at University of Green Bay, and he's going to talk to us about the effects of what Charlie Sykes advocated, the effects of Wisconsin electing Scott Walker and going for Trump. What's that done to the state of Wisconsin throughout the course of the show? So we don't have a ton of time. I've spoken a lot in the introduction here, but I wanted to, before we go on to the history I want to talk to Dan in the second segment primarily. I wanted to get everybody's thoughts on just the fact that there was enough bullying potentially to stop somebody who might be very conservative on almost everything possible, stop him from talking to somebody who might be progressive on almost everything possible to try to fix democracy in America. What that's doing to our discourse. Anyone even want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say at the outset, I mean, that image of him with purple hair and a nose ring, that was pretty dope. He should have leaned into that, I feel like. But in all seriousness, I mean, this is the thing, right? I mean, we hear constantly, I mean, I teach about 150 undergrads a semester. And what I hear from them is this sense of we don't have anything politically that we can grab onto together. It's hard to know what's even true because you have sort of this both sides thing going on, and it's really only one side. And this proves it, right? I mean, you extended the olive branch. This would have been a very, very good conversation. And instead, these bullies on the right basically took somebody who didn't follow the authoritarian party line and deplatformed them. And it's funny because they always talk about how the left is deplatforming people, but we know where it's really coming from.
Yeah, it really is a shame. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that I take more heat from the Democratic Party than anybody else on the panel here for the way that I'm kind of wired. And it takes a certain kind of personality to be able to condemn their own party, to be able to speak out and talk to people across the aisle and deal with that kind of pushback. If there's one thing I've noticed on the right, they are way more coordinated about creating talking points and putting an agenda out there. The moment anything like this happens, it really catches fire. And this is just another one of those kind of examples, mixed with the fact that he just can't handle the heat. I'll be honest with you. I was going to be aggressive today had he actually come on the show. I was going to say, why should we care what never Trump Republicans think about the direction of the Democratic Party? Great, you want to vote for us, but you think we're too far right or left. I don't really care. And that's how I was going to approach it. I'm disappointed he's not here today, and it really does stink, and it does a lot of damage to the discourse right now.
Well, and Ben, I'm not going to say what you put in the text because I'll just put it in my own words, which is, we have we on WCPT have had Joe Walsh on quite a bit. And in a similar way, I mean, obviously as an elected as congressman, as a member of the Tea Party, he had a lot to do with why we are where we are right now. And people like Charlie Sykes. I know that our friend Chris had said that he really put him through it when he was running for office and in the work he's done. And another texter messaged me and said that Charlie Sykes was part of how Ron Johnson ascended to power. And so to come in and then tell us what Democrats are doing wrong or what we should do when they've been a part of the problem. And I know that Joe Walsh is doing the mea culpas and doing the apology thing, but it still hits me emotionally, and it's hard to it's one thing to have a conversation with them, but it's another thing to platform them. And today, I mean, I was looking forward to the conversation as well, but to see that he caved because of the bullying that he himself has participated in was very interesting.
Robert, you want everything to say about Charlie Sykes not showing up?
Yeah, let me just say, I mean, he has a lot of talent. It's amazing transformation he had. If you go back to his impact in this state, not only he made Scott Walker to a large degree and Ron Johnson, and he polarized a long race in the Milwaukee metro area, really revving up the white suburbs against Milwaukee with racialized tones in a way that built the modern kind of Scott Walker wing of the Republican Party. But there came some point, he had moved much that direction as a business proposition. He made some decision that he wasn't going to go full MAGA and be that ridiculous. So he made a different business decision and thought there was a future in anti-MAGA. And he's proven it because he's an MSNBC commentator. But I can just tell you, in the last week, I don't know him personally, but we had plenty of interactions across kind of, the fights. And I did a blog where I said all the things he had to apologize for to actually have a real mea culpa. And he got very upset and he attacked me on the air the last week repeatedly. I was from the left-wing fever swamp. I went back and looked at some of this stuff. I was both Captain Queeg, the Humphrey Bogart character from the famous movie, and Dumb and Dumber, which is not a inconsistent metaphor. The point is, he just went crazy for naming what the crimes were and saying what he had to own up for before he could be not part of MAGA, because he created that kind of divisive authoritarian republicanism and then washed his hands of it and now is welcomed as a progressive commentator on national cable.
All right, Robert, I wanted to bring up Bob, who is the president of the Ozaukee County Democratic Party, who came all the way from Mequon to talk to Charlie Sykes tonight. Bob, you got 30 seconds to tell us how his not showing up hurt the dialogue and hurt the peace we're trying to build.
I'm vice chair, so just to clarify. Hey, great to meet you. Thank you. No, I came here from Mequon. Charlie's my neighbor. I've never met him, but I really wanted to come and hear from him and ask him some questions. I mean, it gives me some hope for the future to see, a Republican with some shred of integrity that will stand up for things that are truly right and stand behind the Constitution. So I wanted to hear that perspective and have a chance to have him, frankly, be interrogated by this wonderful group of people to understand really where he stands on where we go in the future. How do we break the cult? How do we take this crazy town away from the crazies and try to reinstall common sense and democracy? So I came here to hear that tonight, and I'm very disappointed. But I think we've got a great panel, and I'll be listening very carefully. Thanks
a lot, Bob.
Well, I will say it's a little more fun to drag Charlie Sykes and others. Let's take a break.
100%.
I will always think of him with pink hair and nose rings. Let's take a break here. We are joining the Up North podcast, broadcasting live from the Minocqua Brewing Company Taproom in Madison, Wisconsin. Go to MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and continue joining our conversation on WCPT 820 Heartland Signal, KTNF AM 950, and KKNW 1150. More in a moment.
Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk & Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of the money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of progressive beer. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells progressive beer all throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and online to about 30 states. Never seen it? That's likely because we've been banned by distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy progressive beer, go to MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click the Retail Locations tab. That's MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Retail Locations. We get it. Your liver is under constant attack. Alcohol is a dictator that takes away your freedom. It distracts while doing its dirty work. It weakens your judicial system and governing bodies. If you give it too much power, you'll never be the same. We have the solution. 8647 THC hop water. 0 alcohol, 0 calories, tastes like patriotism. 8647 THC hop water. Liberate your liver. Buy 8647 THC hop water and joint session, our THC orange cooler, by going to thc.minocquabrewingcompany.com. That's thc.minocquabrewingcompany.com. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Brewing Company, who sells progressive beer online across the country. If you like the show today, please consider buying one of our beer subscription packages for yourself or a loved one. You can subscribe to the Democrat, the Liberal, and the Progressive, which delivers four packs of beer to your door for 6 months, a year, or 2 years. To find where you can subscribe to get progressive beer delivered to your door every month, go to MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. That's MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. The Minocqua Brewing Company is excited to partner with Brouhaha Coffee to create woke coffee. Get woke, go broke. That's what they say, right? Au contraire, mon frère. This gourmet coffee was awarded 2025 Roast of the Year at the Coffee Break Festival in Wisconsin, and it comes in both medium and dark roasts. Support our political action and enjoy fabulous coffee at the same time. For our Up North podcast listeners, go to the MinocquaMarketplace.com, find coffee under the beverage tab, and type in Up North to get 10% off your order. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com and use the promo code UpNorth.
20, where facts matter.
And we are continuing our broadcast of the Up North podcast. We have, of course, our friends up at the Minocqua Brewing Company Taproom, and as well as other parts of Wisconsin, including Ben Cominos from Outside the Box of WHBY. Take it away, Kirk Bangstad.
Hey, so I wanted to introduce Dan Kaufman in this segment. We can't tell the story of how Wisconsin's been screwed up until we tell the story of Charlie Sykes. And Dan Kaufman, literally, I wept when I read your book, Dan, years ago. When I started becoming an activist in Wisconsin, I was like, how the hell did this happen? I went to high school here, and then, like many people, I left for better opportunities in New York City and in California. But I came back, and I'm like, what the heck happened to my state? And I read your book first. And so I'd love for you to kind of go through, we've got about 10 minutes in this segment, but I want you to kind of go through the history through the lens of Charlie Sykes, if you can. I know you've done tons of work to understand why we got to Act 10, why we broke the public unions' backs, and why we took all the money out of our public schools. If you could tell the story, and if you can't tell it through this Charlie Sykes, that's fine, but tell the story anyways. Thank you so much for coming, by the way.
No problem. And thank you for the kind words on the book, Kurt. Yeah. Well, I didn't really focus too much on Charlie Sykes specifically, but he was an important figure as far as, the conservative media ecosystem that began to dominate the state, in the early 2000s, really before that, through WTMJ, which is a huge station, and was also kind of concurrent with the weakening of local media in many places. A lot of local papers stopped having full-time State House reporters, so the straight news coverage kind of vanished. But I do, just going back into the beginning of my book, Wisconsin had this really remarkable progressive tradition, and that included labor rights. And it was the first state to recognize collective bargaining rights for public employees. And in fact, those rights were expanded by a Republican governor in the late 60s. It was first introduced by Gaylord Nelson in 1959. And in some ways, Wisconsin was a pioneer in all of this stuff. It was 3 years later that John F. Kennedy gave collective bargaining rights to federal workers. And then, of course, in the early 2000s, actually, in some ways, under the Democratic governor, Jim Doyle, there began a demonization of the public sector. Doyle boasted at one point that he had cut more state workers than any governor in Wisconsin history. There's a freeze at the University of Wisconsin. So the kind of austerity that gave rise to Walker was bipartisan to some degrees. President Obama had frozen federal workers' salary in 2010. And 2010 was a kind of watershed election. And Scott Walker won. Republicans won across the board in state legislatures. It was part of a strategy to take over the states. And it was very successful here. And they won a trifecta. And all of these policy goals were really encouraged by Sykes and Mark Belling, another key figure at WTMJ. And I mean, Act 10 was a watershed law that has had not just an amazing, and in my opinion, disastrous effect on Wisconsin, but had real national implications, because in the aftermath of it, many states started demonizing public employees, and there were copycat laws in other states similar. And in fact, I think a lot of Republican states were sort of competing for the attention of donors like the Koch brothers. And of course, the Bradley Foundation was very important in Wisconsin at promoting Scott Walker's career. He had been a Milwaukee County executive 2008, and he had done little events for AFP in the Milwaukee area. They were, I would describe it as kind of auditioning for the attention. And of course, there was this famous prank phone call where a guy named Ian Murphy imitated Scott Walker. At the time, Scott Walker, during Act 10 and the protests, he wasn't really talking to local media, but he did take this call, assuming it was David Koch. And he, it was kind of revealed how the state itself and its own tradition was being supplanted by these national forces. And I think, in some ways, I don't know, Sykes was so instrumental, not just for his career, but also Paul Ryan and the Wisconsin Republican Party, which did so much to transform this state structurally from a state that had, again, a bipartisan tradition of labor rights, good government reforms, encouraging people to vote. It had been one of the easiest states to vote in for a long time. Those were reforms that were pioneered in the 70s. Those things were really overturned. And I would argue that, the recent conversion and this sort of never Trump position that he's in now is more a matter of etiquette. I do think that Scott Walker kind of paved the way. I wrote a piece in 2021 on the 10th anniversary of Act 10 about how Scott Walker paved the way for Donald Trump. And one of the things that Walker did when he was had just been elected, before he had introduced Act 10 publicly, he met famously with Diane Hendricks, his most important donor at the time. She's a billionaire heiress of ABC Building. And they were filming a documentary. A wonderful filmmaker named Brad Lichtenstein was filming a documentary about Janesville, and she reassured him that it would be okay. And he confided in her. She asked, when would Wisconsin become a right-to-work state? And he said, well, have you seen what we're going to be doing with the public employee unions? And then he explained, the kind of parameters of Act 10. And he said, because you got to use divide and conquer. So in other words, he was going to pit public sector workers against private sector workers. And in fact, that's what he did. There was this widespread demonization of public employees, this kind of, a kind of greedy special interest. And this goes back, he was tapping into something that goes back decades. I mean, there were Democratic mayors in Atlanta and in New York City, of course, the fiscal crisis of the mid 70s. There's been, since the mid 70s, really, and the rise of neoliberalism, there's been a demonization of the public sector, which is, of course, one of the goals of people like Milton Friedman, the sort of intellectual heroes of the right, the libertarian right, of which I would place, Paul Ryan and Charlie Sykes, Scott Walker in that camp. And here was an opportunity to further that in Wisconsin. And Walker boasted about, in his book, I think it was called Unintimidated, he said, if we can do it in Wisconsin, we can do it anywhere. And that was his calling card for his presidential run, which went nowhere, of course. But in many ways, I do think that Trump took divide and conquer, which Walker didn't invent, but kind of reanimated, and took it national. And in fact, there was a widespread demonization of federal employees in the first Trump administration. And you're seeing that played out writ large times a million right now. But, Steve Bannon, Trump's consigliere at the time, said that, he called federal workers a privileged class. And there was a similar mentality. And some of the people that were Trump's closest labor advisor, for example, James Shirk, had been in Wisconsin promoting a right to work law here. Of course, Walker betrayed his promise not to sign a right to work law. And in fact, he did use divide and conquer to weaken the labor movement overall. So that's just a quick survey of what happened. And I think the structural implications of what Charlie Sykes was calling for are much more important than a recent conversion, and much more long-lasting than a recent conversion to disliking Trump. I think they're much deeper things that happened. And, a lot of people like him, didn't like Trump's style, and that became a real point of opposition.
Well, I have got to read your book, folks. It's Dan Kaufman, the author of The Fall of Wisconsin. Check out the book, and I really appreciate your insight on this, Dan. That was it's a lot as a fib. We get as involved as we can.
I haven't heard that term since I was in high school, but I do remember.
A group called Fibs for Wisconsin during the Kamala Harris.
No, I know. I've been gone for a while, but.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. So, where can folks find out like your website and social media handles and all those things?
Just the book. If you just Google Fall of Wisconsin, you can buy it. That's the best example. There's many articles in the New Yorker that I've written since, and in the New York Times Magazine. I wrote a piece about NAFTA. I think, what I always look for is like these kind of underlying forces that are shaping where we're at politically. And I wrote a piece last year about NAFTA's effect on Milwaukee. And I think it had an effect on Sykes too. Deindustrialization was a huge factor in African-American poverty and hyper-segregation in Milwaukee that ensued in the aftermath. So
thank you so much, Dan. Let's take a break here. We'll continue our conversation with the Up North podcast, broadcasting live from the Minocqua Brewing Company Taproom in Madison, Wisconsin. More on WCPT 820, KKNW, and KTNF after this.
Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk & Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of our progressive t-shirts. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells t-shirts to supplement our beer sales because we've been banned by beer distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy our t-shirts, go to MinocquaMarketplace.com and go to apparel. For Up North podcast listeners, get 10% off on all of our merch by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Marketplace, or what we like to call the Amazon for progressives. Every product sold on the Minocqua Marketplace is made by a company that's pledged to never donate money to the MAGA movement. There's over 60 companies on our marketplace, and we sell everything from nuts to detergents to doormats. Save democracy with your wallet by shopping only at MinocquaMarketplace.com. For Up North podcast listeners, save 10% on any order in the store by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth. We get it. Your liver is under constant attack. Alcohol is a dictator that takes away your freedom. It distracts while doing its dirty work. It weakens your judicial system and governing bodies. If you give it too much power, you'll never be the same. We have the solution. 8647 THC hop water. Zero alcohol, 0 calories, tastes like patriotism. 8647 THC hop water. Liberate your liver. Buy 8647 THC Hop Water and Joint Session, our THC Orange Cooler, by going to thc.minocquabrewingcompany.com. That's thc.minocquabrewingcompany.com. The Minocqua Brewing Company is excited to partner with Brouhaha Coffee to create woke coffee. Get woke, go broke. That's what they say, right? Au contraire, mon frère. This gourmet coffee was awarded 2025 Roast of the Year at the Coffee Break Festival in Wisconsin, and it comes in both medium and dark roasts. Support our political action and enjoy fabulous coffee at the same time. For our Up North podcast listeners, go to the MinocquaMarketplace.com, find coffee under the beverage tab, and type in Up North to get 10% off your order. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com and use the promo code UpNorth.
Nuh-uh. You don't need to gossip if you want to have an open conversation about vaping. So if you want to get tips on when and how to talk to your...
Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. Patti, we're back. Where are you?
Hey everybody, we're broadcasting live the Up North podcast. Sorry, I'm sitting there talking to one of our engineers, Logan, who's been hooking up all of our cameras and everything. So let's send it back to the Minocqua Brewing Company Taproom in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay, so we just got Dan Kaufman, and he was in the middle. He was about to go to a restaurant with his family, and we got him. And he cared so much about this that he wanted to talk to us, but he had to leave. And so now we want to continue the story. So he didn't have a ton to say about Charlie Sykes, but he said Charlie Sykes was part of this neo-Republican thing that was trying to divide and conquer. And Sykes's show divided and conquered us, and it made fun of Democrats, and it was raw, and it was not Rush Limbaugh, let's be honest, but it wasn't good for our discourse. So now Charlie, he leaves WTMJ in 2016 because he doesn't buy into the Trump world anymore. But what he did in Act 10, which was 2009 or so, changed Wisconsin forever. And so I want to tell this story, and I want Robert to start telling the story because you were there. What happened after Walker got elected, and what happened after Charlie Sykes, helped Walker get elected? Can you pick up the story there and what's happened to Wisconsin ever since, especially with public sector workers?
Yeah, so actually out of the box, it wasn't the fight over labor rights. The first thing was canceling high-speed train. It was all paid for, set manufacturing plant in Central City, Milwaukee, in an area that used to be a vibrant industrial area, had been deindustrialized. And Walker made it clear before he was even inaugurated, we were part of a big resistance campaign that he would cancel it anyway and give away the money. It cost him more to get out of the whole thing than to actually do it with stimulus money. That led into when he's inaugurated and you have the new legislature. No one actually knew how bad it was going to be. There were all rumors it was going to be something against labor, against the trial lawyers. Remember, we were closely allied with the trial lawyers at that time, and they were the first. Act 1 was tort reform, and they went for the jugular. They did unpopular things. They went for like elder abuse in nursing homes and getting rid of any legal torts on that. And so, since I was involved in all that, I advised labor leaders, much to their horror, if the stuff that they're doing to the trial lawyers is any indication, that this is going to be worst case. And then he did, I'm sure John remembers this well, he did what he called drop the bomb. There was suddenly rumors one day that this was absolutely the worst case. And then we learned what Act 10 was, and I don't know, others can tell, and John, you could jump in too about the protests, which were not planned to be, something like the Arab Spring. I mean, as was compared to at the time. It was just, spontaneous, and then it was thought there'd be a day of protest, and then there was another day and another day. It actually developed momentum. That's the thing. There's a lot of research that shows us that there are momentum whirlwind moments where things get beyond planning, where it's not just labor unions and organizing groups turning people out. People are just turning themselves out, right? And this is very early in social media, so you didn't have the socially media-generated mass movements like that. It's even more common now. But it got its own force, and it stunned everyone. So let me stop there to see if there are other comments. But that's how it all laid out, where all of a sudden it was clear he was going nuclear, and he was trying to destroy one of the bedrocks of Democratic Party power in the state of Wisconsin, and worker power. Remember, not only the political power, but it was the power of people in the work sites to have a voice at work. So it was really it's something we don't see from the Democrats. It went for the source of opposition power entirely and tried to completely remove it. Much more ruthless than anything the Democratic Party is capable of planning or executing.
Robert, you did a really good job laying out exactly how we got into that position here. And you're talking to a guy. I did an hour's worth of union talk today on the show. I helped unionize the producers at Odyssey Pittsburgh. We were getting paid $9 an hour, no healthcare benefits, no guaranteed time off. The list goes on and on. What always sticks out to me about that experience is that management after the fact would tell me, if only you knew the great things we had planned for you had you not unionized. And we all understood that that was garbage. We knew that we were in a better position than we were. We are now a decade and a half removed from Act 10. How is this kind of wiring, and I aim this question to both Robert and John here, how is this kind of hardwiring still embedded in so many people? We know teachers are making $10,000 less than they are in Michigan right now. We know manufacturing workers in Wisconsin are doing worse than they are in Michigan and Minnesota. It's not a confusing process here to just look at what is, realize anyone who wasn't impacted by that doesn't have an increase in the standard of living, and the people who were impacted by that felt a decrease in their standard of living. How is it able to persist a decade and a half later? To either one of you.
Yeah, do you want me to go? You'll go ahead, John, if you have something.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I mean, so to your point, Ben, I don't think it actually does persist in terms of what people believe in this country, the vast majority of working people, right? My feeling is that we don't have a persuasion problem, we have an organizing problem. When you look at the fact that we have about 70 to 75%, depending on what region of the country you're talking about, public approval for unions, but union membership is about 11%. That's an organizing problem. That's not a persuasion problem. And you outlined some of the tactics that bosses use to try and discredit unions, to try and keep people from organizing, to try and separate us from each other. That's what Walker did is he took real grievances, right? People were feeling economic pain in 2008, right? You had the Great Recession. You had factories talking about closing. I mean, one of the things I've written about is Mercury Marine, which was talking about outsourcing jobs. And Walker very famously in that campaign in 2010 basically said, like, we're going to keep companies like Mercury Marine here. But he had no plan to do that, right? I mean, basically, like, Mercury Marine stayed because the previous governor actually paid him a boatload of money, paid them a boatload of money. But he took those grievances and drove a wedge between people and divided people. And, I think one of the things that we should look back on, and Kirk, you and I have talked about this a lot on this show and elsewhere about the idea of a general strike. I mean, I wasn't in the state in 2011. I came in 2013. But one of the things that I look back on, and I think a lot of people look back on, is like, would tactically it have been better, instead of having the protests and the massive demonstrations that were so meaningful, to actually figure out a way to shut things down, to have a general strike, right? That's how you actually show the power of working people. That's how you bring people together institutionally. And unfortunately, things move into the recall effort, which didn't work. But again, I think we have an organizing problem. Like, Trump won the election in 2024 because nobody was adequately speaking to the real pain that working people were feeling in this country. And people just wanted something different. And they're going to vote against Trump, as they just did last week. They're going to vote against him in the next couple of elections, assuming we have elections too, because no one's actually improving their lives. I mean, so you can connect this to, like, the capitulation on Dems on the government shutdown. Now health premiums are going to go up. This is only going to improve. Things are only going to improve in this country when workers organize, and this means public and private sector working together to establish a vision and fight for that vision. And that may mean shutting things down to improve people's working lives tangibly. Like, that is the lessons that we should be taking from Act 10.
All right. Thank you a lot. Thanks, John, for talking to us about the whole labor issue going on. I wanted to go back and bring us back to, and I wasn't there. I was living in New York City at the time, but I read extensively. I didn't want to come unprepared for this show, that Charlie Sykes not only broke the backs of WEAC, the public education, the teachers union, and the public sector unions, but he advocated strongly for the private school voucher program, and to take money from public schools to give it to private schools. And a couple statistics. I mean, I think ACT scores in Wisconsin are down dramatically. COVID played a role. Teacher salaries are down dramatically in Wisconsin from previous levels before Walker joined. We were top 5 in the 1990s for public education in Wisconsin. We punched way above our belt in terms of what we had financially. Like, none of us are rich in Wisconsin. We're all middle class, basically, or at least we were. And somehow we had a top 5 education system in our state. And now it's dropped dramatically because it's not been funded. So, John, talk to us. We got about 1 minute left. Sorry. Just give us your thoughts on what Sykes and Walker did to public education.
So first of all, they did not break the backs of our unions. We are continuing to fight, and in AFT Wisconsin, we're building strong, and we expect to win this lawsuit next year. But the voucher thing, it's all about dividing, right? You heard Dan Kaufman say divide and conquer. They don't want any sort of public institutions capable of bringing us together. They want us to all see ourselves as individual people set apart from each other, competing with each other for scarce resources, not having an education system, a public education, a common education, where we all learn the same things and are brought together by that common experience. They don't want that. That is at base what defines conservatism and Trumpism in this country. And again, we have an organizing problem that we have to solve in order to transcend that.
They also don't want critical thinking. I'm just saying.
Yep.
That's a big part of it. Just learn to the tests. We are having an amazing conversation with our friends in the Up North podcast, of course, broadcasting live from the Minocqua Brewing Company Taproom in Madison, Wisconsin. We're joined by Robert Craig from Citizens Action in Wisconsin, Jon Shelton, President AFT Wisconsin, of course, Ben Cominos, Outside the Box host on WHBY. He's got an app, fine, whatever. And our fearless leader on this podcast, Kirk Bangstad. More in a moment on WCPT 820, Heartland, Salem, KKNW 1150, and KTNF AM 950.
Joan Esposito.
Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk and Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of the money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of progressive beer. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells progressive beer all throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and online to about 30 states. Never seen it? That's likely because we've been banned by distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy progressive beer, go to MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click the Retail Locations tab. That's MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Retail Locations. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Marketplace, or what we like to call the Amazon for progressives. Every product sold on the Minocqua Marketplace is made by a company that's pledged to never donate money to the MAGA movement. There's over 60 companies on our marketplace, and we sell everything from nuts to detergents to doormats. Save democracy with your wallet by shopping only at MinocquaMarketplace.com. For Up North podcast listeners, save 10% on any order in the store by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth. The Up North podcast is sponsored by the Minocqua Brewing Company, who sells progressive beer online across the country. If you like the show today, please consider buying one of our beer subscription packages for yourself or a loved one. You can subscribe to the Democrat, the Liberal, and the Progressive, which delivers four packs of beer to your door for 6 months, a year, or 2 years. To find where you can subscribe to get progressive beer delivered to your door every month, go to MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. That's MinocquaBrewingCompany.com and click Progressive Beer. Believe it or not, this podcast takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make Kirk and Company look like they know what they're doing. And a lot of money that goes to pay our producers and editors comes from the sale of our progressive t-shirts. The Minocqua Brewing Company sells t-shirts to supplement our beer sales because we've been banned by beer distributors for our unapologetically progressive voice. To find where you can buy our t-shirts, go to MinocquaMarketplace.com and go to Apparel. For Up North podcast listeners, get 10% off on all of our merch by going to MinocquaMarketplace.com and typing in promo code UpNorth. That's MinocquaMarketplace.com, promo code UpNorth.
WCPT
from TuneIn.
And we are back with the Up North podcast. I also want to remind folks, I want to thank our sponsors, Pride Coffee Roasters. Go to PrideCoffeeRoasters.com, and Source Solar. And of course, our sponsor, Minocqua Brewing Company, bringing you the Up North podcast from the Madison Taproom. Here's Kirk Bangstad with our final stretch of the show.
Okay, we got about 10 minutes left, and we're starting to grow this audience in our tap room, and there's a couple public school teachers here that pointed themselves out in between our commercial break, and so I wanted to let Lisa ask a question. I think this one's probably going to be to Robert or John, but yeah. You can ask whoever you want. Lisa, you're up.
Okay, so my history is I worked for Milwaukee Public Schools for like 28 years. And through that time period, when Act 10 came about, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I was going through that whole process of going down and protesting and trying to figure out what could we do to help our situation. And as my job in working in Milwaukee, a lot of the funding that we saw going away towards vouchers, it was frustrating because in my role, I did a lot of special ed testing. We'd see kids get tested, requested, and then they go out to these voucher schools, and all the money in Milwaukee stays out there. If they get tested, it doesn't come back. So that was my question. How did that get impacted with Act 10?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, you know, that the voucher thing is obviously a separate thing from Act 10, but the two things obviously work together. I mean, I live in Green Bay, and same kind of thing. I mean, we pay, I forget what the exact number is, but something like, you know, $5-6 million a year go to voucher schools. And I mean, you know, I mean, Albert Shanker, the president of AFT, talked about this in the very origins of vouchers, which come from Milton Friedman, this libertarian economist who thought that the government really had no obligation to do anything for anybody. And, you know, Shanker's critique of vouchers in the very early stages in the 80s was basically like, you have a public school system that's obligated to take every single student, right? That is the right that people have in this country, is to have the right to a public education. And voucher schools don't have that obligation. So they can, you know, they get the money, but they can take a student, they can not take a student, and they can pick and choose which students they have, and leave, frankly, the more expensive students with high special education needs in public schools. People don't realize that voucher schools do not have to take students who want to go there. And so it's opening the market, but in a completely unfair competition. So it's the worst of both worlds, honestly, and it's got to end in the state. We have to figure out a way to end it.
Cheers. Thank you, John. We have Mike, who I met up in Minocqua because he's an artist and he plays guitar and sings, I think, but he also is a retired school teacher, and he had a question as well. Mike, go for it.
Hi, my name's Mike. I taught in Verona, Wisconsin for 25 years. And Act 10 got passed the year before I retired. I stayed on for 1 year, kind of keeping my fingers crossed that benefits wouldn't be totally yanked. They were not. So I retired relatively early compared to when I probably would have chosen to. And not by coincidence, I think we had like 100% more retirees that year than any other year we had at the high school. And we saw a tremendous drain of good talent leave the school. So I guess my question is, what do we now do to prevent that? My understanding is there's a movement to investigate the whole Act 10 and declare it unconstitutional, or at least question its validity. And will that help? Because my experience with seeing the school system in Verona now is they're having a really tough time keeping and maintaining teachers. So I guess my question is, what do we do about that?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And first of all, I want to thank you for your service. We should be thanking teachers for their service in public education. Seriously.
I'm like a veteran, but
you know, first of all, there was a study done by the Center for American Progress in like 2018, 2019. I consulted on it, and teacher turnover in Wisconsin was like, I can't remember the exact number, but it was significantly higher than every state around us. And it was like you could draw a direct line from Act 10. And so you put it exactly the right way. Think about all of the talent that was lost in your school district all across the state and what that meant for students, right? That generation of students who lost access to that institutional memory, to those teachers who all had a lifetime of skills. The Act 10, it's more than a movement. It's actually a lawsuit. Act 10 technically right now has been overturned in a lower court. It's been stayed upon appeal, which means that there's been no remedy yet because the lower court anticipates this going eventually to the state Supreme Court. Given the makeup of that court, my union, AFT Wisconsin, is one of the 5 plaintiffs. You know, we expect to win that lawsuit. Of course, nothing is given. But we believe that Act 10 is unconstitutional, and it has deprived us of due process rights over the last, equal protection rights over the last decade and a half. And it's got to change. We think it is going to change. And in our union, what we're doing is we would be doing this anyway. We put all of our resources into organizing and building power at our workplace, even without collective bargaining. But we're really readying our locals for this right now, because restoring that tool to build power is going to change everything in our state. So we're really looking forward to that. And I'm as optimistic as I've been in a very long time in Wisconsin, notwithstanding all the stuff that's happening at the national level.
Robert, I wanted to ask you the next question. We're getting to the end of the show, and we started talking about what Charlie Sykes is kind of how he affected Wisconsin. We talked about how Wisconsin has kind of taken a fall after he helped get Scott Walker in, and Act 10 took place. But Charlie Sykes did make a pivot. He became a never Trumper. He started the Bulwark, which is a website and a Substack page that a lot of people read, and he is ultimately after the same things that all of us in this room and all of us are on this Zoom call are after, which is to save democracy from fascism, from authoritarianism. Robert, how do we work with how do progressives like the both of us are? How can we join hands with center-right Republicans who are disgusted with what they're seeing right now?
Yeah, and I don't even know if they have to be center, Kirk, actually, because what the reason there's an audience for right-wing populism, MAGA populism, is because people are fed up and frustrated by things like deindustrialization and gutting of their schools. And when Democrats don't actually make things better, don't deliver, you actually feed into that. Or if you act like you're part of the establishment, which too many elected Democrats do, when people are mad at the establishment, think the system is rigged by powerful people and doesn't help them. And so MAGA lies to you and says it's taking those on when it's actually in bed with them, and uses divide and conquer to do that as well. So we need to offer them genuine populism, but then we have to deliver. We had every Democrat who won in Tuesday talking about the affordability crisis. But the question is, the ones that are making it a talking point will help damage democracy if they don't deliver. So you have to do things like Zoran Mandami is very specific about what he would actually do that would actually improve people's lives and then hold people accountable for that. So that is the key point here. And really, they have capitalized off the death of democracy. But we have to remember, and this is where I don't know where Charlie Sykes is, there's both the mechanisms of liberal democracy, having fair elections, but then there's a democracy that works for people and works on our biggest problems. I'm not sure Charlie wants to take on the climate crisis, the healthcare crisis, the housing crisis, any of those things, but at least he's halfway there, and his current business proposition is better for us than his previous one.
And that's a thing for a lot of my listeners, because we have had Joe Walsh on here many times, who has been also part of the problem and led us to the situation. And that, it's also the talking down to us and like what we're doing wrong. So how do we work with folks like Charlie Sykes and Joe Walsh and the Never Trumpers, who, again, led us to the situation in many ways?
Well, it's a united front now. This is an old concept from the old fascism, right? So we need to work with everyone who wants to say the mechanism of democracy. But we have to understand that for progressive, it's a two-front war. We also need to deliver a democracy that's actually going to, create universal, high-quality public schools. I hope John's lawsuit works, AFT's lawsuit, but you never can trust courts entirely. If there's a Democratic trifecta, that because of gerrymandering, this is the first opportunity. Will Democrats do it, and will they fund it? Because let's face it, they're going to need to raise a ton of revenue to make up for all the damage of Act 10. Governor Evers' budgets have been floated on Act 10 and on the terrible underpaying of public employees and educators. And so to be serious, you have to repeal it, but then you have to fund high-quality jobs because, look at it in education. John's spoken to this very eloquently. What other profession do you think you improve it by de-skilling it and not paying people? Do you say, let's pay doctors less, then we'll get better cancer outcomes? No one says that, right? Which tells you that this is just an attack on the basic requisites of democracy, education being one of the first fundamental elements of having a large-scale universal democracy. And one of the most radical things the U.S. did was universal free education, and they're trying to undermine it.
You're up, Patti. Lead us out of here.
Oh, we're all set. Is it already? Oh, it's already that time. Oh my God, how the time flies! This is an amazing. I know. I'm with you guys. What a wonderful conversation with so many brilliant speakers. I want to thank everyone on the show today. Dan Kaufman. We also want to thank Robert Craig, Kirk Bangstad, of course, our fearless leader, Jon Shelton, Amy Thomas. Thank you for everything you've done behind the scenes and all the great work. And of course, everyone tune into Outside the Box. All right, bye, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, Lily B.